name is Alicata. I am a program manager with Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. I've been with the organization since February of this year, and my role within the organization is to help support our network building efforts, their online community, and to create educational content to inform and inspire people with STEM backgrounds to get civically engaged on the local level. I personally come from an academic background in neuroscience research specifically, but I've been working in the nonprofit sector since 2021. And I want to make this event happen because, as difficult as this time might be for a lot of us and thinking about the future of science as an enterprise, I think that in times of change, there's also opportunities to dream of and create a better future. And we know that the current research enterprise has created a lot of great things, has impacted our daily lives in a lot of ways, but I think us in the field also understand that there are ways that we can improve what we're doing, and make it better. So I'm hoping we can dream about that a bit together today. Next slide, please. I'd like to shout out two of our team members, Jessica Wu, our events team director, and Taylor Spicer, our executive director, for helping make this event possible and to reach as many people as we have here today. Next slide, please. So who are we at Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally? At this time, we're a group of about 2,000 scientists and engineers and 250 civic leaders across the country collaborating for the public's interests. We are driven by our belief in the importance and impact of local civic engagement, especially for scientists, engineers, as well as people in tech and mathematics. We act as the STEM community's key source of state and local engagement information, instruction, and inspiration. And one of our aims is to facilitate closing gaps in information, training, and relationships that may exist between folks in STEM, their current knowledge and expertise, and what they're interested in engaging in. One of our core beliefs is that communities thrive when members participate together, and that means that communities can benefit from STEM professionals getting involved, and STEM professionals can benefit from being involved in their communities. Next slide, please. There are three main ways we think about what we do, facilitating learning, relationships, and action. So to help people learn, we write and publish articles on our website from topics including people involved in STEM activities in their communities, people with STEM backgrounds that are locally engaged, and other people and organizations that are impacting their local communities. We also provide deep dive articles on local STEM issues, policy approaches, and impacts. To help build relationships, we host virtual events like this one, as well as in-person workshops and conference sessions, and we provide networking opportunities. And finally, we provide tools and resources such as information on government structures, how-to guides, and opportunities to connect and act across the country. Next slide. I wanted to let you all know that if you're interested in having that hands-on approach and instruction with us, you can consider planning a workshop with us. We can customize that workshop to your group's interests and location and provide case studies on how STEM professionals have been involved locally and dive into topics of interest or provide step-by-step instruction using our toolkits. You can visit esal.us/workshops for more information. I would also like to invite everyone here to join us on our online platform, ESAL Community. Here, we're building our capacity to help people learn, meet, and act by having this tool, which is the centralized place for us to build relationships, organize locally, and by topics of interest, and provide trainings and timely resources to help you prepare to engage locally. We're here to help you connect with others, to find ways to engage, and to support the work you do in your communities already. We have a couple upcoming events I want to let you know about. We are having a community gathering next week on October 8th, and an action hour the following week on October 15th. Our action hours in particular are opportunities for us to set aside time to do the work of engaging locally while supporting one another. I hope you'll consider using the QR code or link provided here and in the chat to sign up for the community and join us at one or both of these events. I also wanted to let you know that at ESAL, we are largely volunteer run, and we have people from all sorts of backgrounds and experiences. We're always looking to add to our team, and we have several volunteer openings at this time. So please feel free to get in touch if any of these are interesting to you. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting this webinar. And if you want to stay in touch with us, you can sign up for our newsletter using the QR code or link here or in the chat. All right. Thank you for your attention to that. And I'd like to get started with introducing our panelists. First up, we have Fatima Abdurrahman. Dr. Fatima Abdurrahman has a background in physics and science, technology, and society, which she has used in prior work to help shift departmental cultures towards greater inclusion of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and provide education on macroethical perspectives in STEM. Through her YouTube channel, Dr. Fatima, she provides political education for STEM brains, covering topics ranging from raising questions about the scientific method to exploring astronomy's colonial legacies. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Next, we have Dr. Mahmud Farooque. Mahmud Farooque is the director of the Consortium for Science, Policy, and Outcomes, run through Arizona State University and based in Washington, D.C. At the CSPO, he connects academic ideas with policymakers, focusing on how science and technology policy can better serve society. Projects explore issues such as nuclear waste, CO2 removal, and the future of the NSF, using methods like participatory technology assessment to bring community voices into national science policy debates. The consortium aims to reestablish a link between science and society by reframing problems, elevating marginalized perspectives, and fostering collaboration between universities, scientists, and local communities. Welcome, Mahmoud.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Dr. Darin Gray. Dr. Darin Gray has built a career in STEM education, moving from engineering into teaching and outreach, and works for the University of Southern California's Viterbi School of Engineering K-12 STEM Center. He focuses on community-based STEM engagement, especially through citizen science projects that make science accessible in everyday environments like parks, libraries, and neighborhoods. By partnering with organizations such as SciStarter and the LA Public Library, he helps young people connect science to their own communities, fostering curiosity, local engagement, and environmental awareness. Welcome, Darin. So with that, I'd like to get started by asking each of the panelists a question specifically for them to let you know a little bit about where they come from and their perspective. So I'm going to start with Fatima. So my first question is, in the videos you create for your YouTube channel, you interrogate common assumptions in scientific research and discuss ways that knowledge has been created in multiple cultural contexts. As the American research institutional model in particular is subject to change at this time, what are some lessons we can learn from other systems throughout history that have had different resources and different pressures, but still produce important and vital knowledge?
Thank you so much for the question. I hear something outside my window. I hope it's not too loud. But I think one potentially relevant lesson from particularly non-Western knowledge traditions is that we might take this as an opportunity to start treating the public less like the audience of science and treating them more like the reason for or even the co-creators of science. And by that, I mean grounding science in what the needs of people are. Because when I think about the enduring knowledge produced by indigenous societies, it's all very need-driven, right? It's developing knowledge of ecology for land management, or of meteorology for navigation, or even astronomy for divination, right? And maybe that sounds very generic, like all science interests are often need-based in some way. But I'm reminded of, for example, this physics department at the University of Michigan, I believe. And it's an applied physics program where every grad student has to do something interdisciplinary with another department that actually applies physics to some context people could benefit from. My context is physics, so that's why I'm speaking to physics. But not to dismiss basic research, but both from my impression of public perception of, say, physics and astronomy, and my own perception as a former researcher of these fields, they're very much dominated by the prestige of like abstraction, and the further removed it is from life, the more important and valuable we often see it. And in this context, an applied physics program like that at this department I'm mentioning it stands out as a rare example to me of academic research in my areas, at least, being directed at people's needs. Um, and so I think this idea of more consciously directing even fields like physics more towards people's needs is important for a couple reasons. For one, physics is very powerful and we have lots of needs, and being useful is one of the beautiful things of science. But I also think it builds public buy-in, especially when done in community grounded ways, because if it's about people's lives and people care about their lives more than, something that feels like an imaginary particle or a planet or whatever, that might be interesting intellectually in some context. And again, has its place. Um, but I think if the question is what we can learn, it's that as we rebuild institutions, which, based on what's happening right now, we are going to have to do some amount of rebuilding. Uh, I would hope that we can do it in such a way that usefulness and public partnership are core values rather than afterthoughts. Uh, yeah.
Thank you for that. I think we're definitely going to touch on more ideas of like community integration in science with some of the future questions we have. And I think that's a great
Definitely.
way to start us off. Thank you.
Of course.
I have a question for Mahmoud. So you work at the Consortium of Science and Policy Outcome, which is focused on bridging the gap between research, policymakers, and the public. In your view, what factors have contributed to the current relationship between science as an institution and communities, and what opportunities do we have in this moment to improve that relationship?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And Fatima actually helps me build up the argument where I was going to go with it. So, historically, if you look at in the US science policy, there's always been the tension between knowledge production and use. And it's a pendulum that keeps swinging from one direction to another, depending on the demand condition, technological opportunities, and our policy choices that we make. If you look at in the 1900s, 1800s, you will see the land grant was the big thing. That was totally about use-driven, applied, bringing communities and researchers together. But then you have Vannevar Bush, after post-World War, we swing in the other direction. We said, no, knowledge, that, as Fatima was saying, the abstract production of knowledge separated from consideration of use. So CISPO, when it was started about 25, 26 years ago, invited people to let's rethink science policy. And the three things that you said between researchers, policy, and the public, the rethinking we said, because we felt like the whole science policy debate in the 90s were locked into science policy as being budget policy, science policy being this continuous battle between basic versus applied research. It's about being input and output. So what we said, okay, let's think about outcomes. And, we are taking public money for public purposes. Let's see how we are doing in terms of those. But it's an incremental process. You just cannot go from, abstraction to the reality that you want. You have to take kind of baby steps. And our first baby step was, okay, let's get social scientists to work with the physical and natural scientists. That was revolutionary because if you think about in 2000s, that's when the nano authorization came, and that was the radical idea. Okay, we're going to do this fundamental science and material science and engineering. Let's study societal implications. So that was, and that's when NSF also started the SciSip program. So CISPO played a role in that with the idea what we called real-time technology assessment. That means we cannot just wait for the science to be done and then think about society. Let's figure out at the upstream, as we are thinking, imagining all these different futures, which is our today's conversation, how can we bring and co-shape this, what Fatima was talking. So that journey, its basic idea is first getting a seat at the table. And once you're at the seat at the table, then you get a better, more opportunity to see how the table is configured. So our next challenge was the policy piece, which was then the connecting, science to decision support. And there's missed opportunities. We produce science that doesn't actually answer the questions policymakers, decision makers had. So that was the second phase. And then, okay, now let's also bring in the public. And that's where we were working with museums, and that's also with the NICENet and all those early nano authorization, and where we kind of shifted from public understandings on science to public engagement in science. So with all of these, to answer your question, where do I see the opportunity, is actually in the spaces in between. The role that, organization like yours, the role that Fatima, the role that Darin is playing, is the connector. I think that's the space where the real opportunity now comes, and we are really called to step up. And I see so many people doing that, and that's really, I find, encouraging, even despite of all the destruction that's going on around us. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think there's so much importance of like the relationship, right? Like knowing each other, connecting between communities. And there's so many ways that your response touched on that. And I'd love to dive into that more as we keep our discussion going. So I have a question for Darin. Through your leadership at the USC Viterbi K through 12 STEM Center, you spend decades helping students and communities discover the power of science by observing the world around them. In your experience, how does helping instill scientific curiosity in people change the way they view scientific research? And what opportunities do educators have to meet the current moment?
Well, thanks for the question. But I would, instead of use the word instill, I would use reawaken. If you've ever been around any kid, they have hundreds of questions about everything around them. Why is this? Why is that? Why is this? Or what reason is this? And so, what we do in our STEM outreach is we reawaken that curiosity by having the kids constantly ask the question, why? And then when we talk to the parents, it's the same thing. Like, why are there a certain type of ants in my neighborhood? Why are the pigeons here? Like, why do we now all of a sudden have these urban hawks all over the greater Los Angeles area? Why are there these wild parrots? Yeah, if you look up Los Angeles and you Google wild parrots, there's like 100 different stories as to why we have wild parrots. Whether it was like uh, a store burned down or somebody released them, but we have all these wild parrots. When you start asking the question of why, then people start looking for answers, and you can help them find some of the answers in their very own community by having them do small experiments. It's like, why do certain types of plants grow in Southern California? Why do we have palm trees in the semi-arid desert? Those are the types of things that people start asking. And when you start asking those questions and getting people to start thinking about the world around them, their communities, their neighborhoods, their schools, then they start asking more in-depth questions, and they start to question even some of what they've been told, not in a bad way, but in a good way. It's hey, we're told that we should conserve water, but then our water bill goes up because we're not using enough water. Well, why is that? Why are we having all of these issues with fires here in Southern California? Is it because of climate change? Is it encroachment? Here on campus now, we have these warning signs about coyotes. And so the University of Southern California is in an urban area. It's in the midst of South Los Angeles. Somehow the coyotes found their way to campus because they said, hey, there's a plenty food source there because we've got lots of other small animals that are eating the trash that all, thousands of people that are on campus. So how did the coyotes get from the hills through the city, through traffic to the campus? And where do they go? Where are they hiding? I was walking on campus one morning and I saw these massive animals. I thought they were dogs because they were so big. They were possums. And I was like, oh my God, that's a giant possum. And so when you start asking those questions and you start getting, people in their communities to just be curious about things, then they start being curious about scientific research. They hear things on the news or they hear things on social media and they want more information. And the idea with curiosity is to get people to interrogate what they've been told. And it's a little bit more challenging now because of social media and artificial intelligence. One thing that I share with families is when you are using the internet, those of us that were on the internet long before the World Wide Web remember this, essentially you're trusting that the designers are giving you a fair answer. Whereas in the beginning, that was great. You can do all sorts of finding out things. You know, those have been around. Remember the where you had to type in the on the command line and view all your questions there before the World Wide Web. But when you start to help people to understand that asking the question and then asking a question of the answer is very important, even with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence gathers information from all sorts of sources. Well, you have to interrogate that. And I think when we get people to reawaken that curiosity, they're more interested in scientific research. And educators can meet the moment, because there can be something as you're walking to class and a little lizard walks across your path, and you ask a question like, there must be a food source. Whenever you see spiders, you say, they're only here because there's something there that they want to eat. I tell my daughter that all the time. She said, why do I have so many spiders? I'm like, they're only there if there's food. And so we want people to do that. And I see someone said question things, but not getting them to fall into conspiracy theories. I think we get people to interrogate the information they get by just asking more and more questions. Why is that the case? And some of the things that we've been taught, I don't know if you've all heard the thing about, you know, the toilets go the other way in the southern hemisphere because of the rotation of the earth. You know, that people have been saying that for years. When I was 5 years old, I asked my dad about, because I'm from Detroit, they used to shoot guns for New Year's. And I used to say, what happened when the bullet comes down? And he said, oh, it won't hurt you because it's cold. And I believed that till I took physics, and I was like, oh, that wasn't true. So I had to call him and say, so Dad, remember what you told me? But it was something that was taught to him, and he believed it. And now by having people interrogate everything and ask questions, not looking for, you know, the answer, but looking for a new question, I think it's important to instill that level of scientific curiosity. And educators can meet that moment by helping people to think critically, ask questions, and then ask questions of the answers, and to challenge their own thoughts about the things they've been taught. Not in a, you know, everybody's wrong or any of that. It's how do we see the world as it is? And then engaging in citizen science, where you can work with people from around the world and find out what else people are asking. I have a colleague that's in Nigeria, and he runs a STEM school, and having his kids talk to my kids about things that are interesting for them. I think it's important that we engage in these conversations, but also get people to enjoy asking the questions.
Thank you for that, Darin. I think there's so much in there about like how we can change how people view as science as like integral to what society is and how we interact with each other. I want to take a little bit of a step back and kind of talk a little bit about how we got to where we are today and like how research looks the way it looks, so that we can think about what's next. I always think it's helpful to take more of a long view of the current moment so that we can see the trends in a different light. So my question is, you know, as science funding in the US has gone through big shift throughout history. So we started off with the NIH in the early 1900s, tackling infectious disease, to post-war expansion, centralizing research priority setting more federally, and now we have more recent pressures of global competition. We've really seen successes, but also challenges in spending more money and not always getting meaningful outcomes. So how do you see the history of the NIH and the research institution in the US in particular shaping the pressure science faces today, and what lessons can help us imagine new models that center community needs and this relationship between science and society?
Wow, that was a mouthful. I'll take a stab at it. I think what we have to look at is, as folks in the scientific and in the world, is really examining the key questions that are facing humanity. Some people call them the grand challenges or the wicked problems, and see what is it that we in the science community need to do in working together to solve some of those problems. And of course, governments around the world are going to always put funding toward their own objectives, because that's what society does. But it doesn't change our thinking. It goes back to that scientific curiosity. If you find in a particular neighborhood there's a high incidence of asthma, Well, the people who fund things may not be interested in that, but there are things that we can do locally as a community to help us discover some things that can solve some of those questions. I think the community base of science is essentially where all of the advances in science have come over the years. It's, you know, in the last couple of centuries where we've had government funded or university funded directing the, you know, the science. But, you know, before you had, you know, patrons who were deciding what was important, you had people who were just in their backyard building and making or testing. I think we need to remember what's important, and that's using our collective knowledge and community for the betterment of humankind. And we can lead the way in terms of having the people around us support us in that area.
Fatima, you want to go or you want?
Oh, please go ahead.
So I'm, you know, because of my expertise and involvement, I come at it more of an institutional framework. And when I tend to think about the history, you know, I'm thinking about the history of, you know, science policy, specifically in the United States. And if you see, you know, the blueprint that offered, it's not just, it's actually not NIH, NSF was the blueprint for how post-war science policy should be done. And it was, you know, the idea of free play of free ideas, but do not, no consideration of use or society. And it was, you know, the famous linear model you had, like society coming at the very end, right? You have basic science, applied science, commercialization. But then that model, and this is why I take an evolutionary view, is that at some point it doesn't work anymore, right? And when it doesn't work, we question, like Darin was saying. That's when we ask the question and we see what's wrong and we come up with a solution. So in the 80s, we had a, you know, that was the time when we were, you know, losing competitiveness to, right now we're losing to China, but we were losing to Japan. There was also structural imbalances and serious economic hardship and all of that. And then we looked at it and we said, okay, we just cannot do science for the sake of science. We have to look at science for also for useful purpose. And that's the idea of usable science. You know, at that point, you know, NSF started the engineering directorate. So we were more doing training, working with industry, trying to focus on the areas that was of national interest. And that works for a while, right? And then we come at the turn of the century and we see that, no, we have, you know, we are getting the science right, we are getting our predictions right, but the societal response, starting with like big lessons from Katrina and so forth, like we got the prediction right, but we didn't get our response right. So we need to actually also look at the societal side of it. And that's when you can also see that National Science Foundation, again, evolving in that direction, which I will call science for decision support. But right now, I think where we are at is what Fatima was bringing up, this science for societal purpose, societal needs. Because what it seems like we are kind of becoming very good at addressing what our national priorities and needs are, let's say quantum or AI or big tech. But then our communities also have these needs, with basic needs with water, air, and all of their quality of life, their health and human. So we are not actually the system. So there's an opportunity, I think, is because it's an evolving system. It responds to the demand conditions. And I think that's why, you know, I'm obviously, it is an indication that we failed to meet the current moment. And the big question is, how do we do that? And this is why I think conversations like this are good starting points for us to help us get to that. Thank you.
I am trying not to start speaking to what I know are the follow-up questions. But there's a lot of interesting things here to say. Like as Mahmoud was getting to, there's this interesting shift in how the contract, like the social contract between science and the public has shifted. Because like in this you know, history you describe, Al, we have this like big centralized funding that has this effect of abstracting science away from the public. Like I've said before, like it's what are the goals for the nation, and it's the nation's goals as decided by whoever's in power, and that has such a direct influence on the outcomes of science rather than the goals for this particular community with these particular needs as decided by people in that community. Uh, I think it's a very alienating dynamic at this point, right? When we have so little like public trust in scientific institutions, it has to do, I think, with this separation of the needs of people on the ground, if you will, and the needs of people as defined by their government or whoever is in charge at the moment. And you know, I'm the last one to answer the question, so I'll kind of start going into what I know the follow-up. You know, in this moment where we're getting less and less federal funds for scientific research, there's you know, the impulse to look at how we can turn to the local level and get scientific work done that way instead. And I think there's a really exciting opportunity in that possibility because I think it would necessitate science's accountability to the public in a much stronger way than the model of federal funding agencies has. And an interesting thing about that, as somebody who is a researcher, I think that might intuitively feel like a downgrade to some researchers because it maybe means less intellectual freedom to do whatever interesting, following my curiosity in whatever esoteric way and pushing the limits of physics or whatever. But again, if we're considering science as a public good, that grounding in people's needs, I think it feeds into a reflexive relationship where the public and science as an institution are both benefiting from this dynamic. So yeah, I think engaging on the local level introduces different accountability needs. And I think that can initially seem like a limitation, but I think it's actually a really exciting opportunity for a new contract with the public about what science is and what it means to them, what it is in their lives. And I would think it's uncontroversial to say that maybe we need a new scientific contract with the public.
Yeah, there's so much in there that I think is so important in how we consider like the steps forward. So yeah, as Fatima alluded to, I think there are opportunities to move towards the local level in terms of funding, in terms of resources. And I'm wondering if I know Fatima spoke on it a little bit, if others can speak a little bit on how we might benefit from turning to that local level and what that potentially you might imagine that could look like.
Oh, Fatima and Mahmud, they both sort of nailed it in terms of that accountability. When you bring that curiosity and that interest, whether it's applied science or pure theoretical science, into the community, then you're able to look at resources. In the olden days, when first robotics came out years and years ago, it was really, really expensive to get a robot team started, and you know all the big corporations were sponsoring some of the teams. And then what we found in our communities is the local mechanic would be able to sponsor a robot team. You know, if you look back in sports where the cleaners would sponsor the baseball team, there are a lot of people who would engage in things that impact their community. So like we had the fires out here, and in one of the communities, a historical African American community, they're interested in soil science. They're interested in, hey, what are some things that we can do to understand what a non-indigenous plant can do to our community. So I think by connecting science and science research, whether it's theoretical or pure or applied science to people's everyday experiences, then you can look at new ways of resourcing, whether it's governmental or even your local communities coming together. And I know crowdfunding is a big way of raising funds now. I think that connecting in taking away the mystery and the shroud of, you know, there's the scientist, us, and then the public, them, by engaging young people and older people and families in science research or science questioning, you could look at new ways of gaining those resources, whether it's the schools, the local municipal government, or neighborhood cleaners.
Yeah, so I would give a shout out to the Thriving Earth Exchange and their early going when they were, matching up with scientists, with local communities. They were also trying to, for things that required more funding or research and so forth, do some crowdsourcing and to go and raise funds for that particular community need and so forth. So I think there's at a smaller scale, there is that model that you can then scale from community to community, right? But it still leaves you a little short of the things that are a little bit bigger for one community to undertake. And then I think there's a big role for the states. And I think, and there's some encouraging signs that we see the states are stepping up to fill some of the voids, especially the idea about this Western Health Alliance that's appearing, because as Fatima said, it's not really the trust in scientists. I would push back. Trust in science has always been kind of strong. It's trust in the institutions of science. This is a very different thing. So who is that? So even when we are doing our community dialogues, and we did this all over Arizona, we were asking, okay, this was about nuclear waste management, and the question was, who do you want to see have the oversight of this process? And what the proposal was, it should not be Department of Energy, should be an independent federal agency. But what people actually like, not the idea of independent federal agency, but independent scientists. So I think that kind of gives you a signal that the trust in science is still there, but it's how it's that represented and who is doing that representing. So, and I think that this is the opportunity for the states actually to now step up to the void and then, because they do have sources of funding and they can support things that are larger than at the community scale. So I do see that there is a state role here, and they have also the similar problems. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, everyone, for those perspectives. I think a lot of what we've been touching around too is like, how can the community be more involved in scientists, whether that be like supporting, like being more supportive of and involved in like the questions being asked, or like direct financial support. So we live in an era of like crowdsourcing, crowdfunding. And I think that's potentially an opportunity for folks to get involved in research in a way that they feel like real ownership of what can occur. So I was wondering if you all can talk a little bit about like how you might see non-traditional approaches of community involvement in science, such as crowdfunding, allowing communities to shape, fund, guide research to meet their needs, and what those models might look like in practice.
I think I have a good example for this. So again, my main job these days is I'm a YouTuber, but I don't make most of my money through YouTube. I make most of my money through something called Patreon, which is basically a platform that I say, here's my Patreon page, sign up if you want to support me. And people pay like $3, $5, $10 a month, whatever. There's a bunch of people, shout out to the Patreon members who are here in the chat. But I am basically now, having done this for a few years, a crowd-funded independent academic, right? I don't have a university affiliation or salary at this point, but I am making a livelihood and producing scholarship on my own because, some 1,500 people decided they would send me a few dollars a month. So appreciate them. But I think this as a possibility for doing whatever kind of work has so much potential. I haven't yet seen people doing scientific research on Patreon, but I've absolutely seen like open source software developers who are Patreon supported. And I could easily imagine scientific research, at least on some smaller scales, being supported in a similar way. And a really nice thing, something I absolutely love about the Patreon, is how good it is for back and forth. Because, I'm a science communicator. It's easy to feel like I am just putting things out. I am deciding what people want and making it and delivering it to them. But I actually get so much feedback and engagement from the people who support me on what they actually want from me, which is an amazing resource to have, both as just like a helpful thing for somebody deciding what to make, but actually really getting the most out of that kind of reflexive relationship where I was talking about before, where I'm trying to speak to the needs of people as I see them kind of show themselves. So I have a lot of optimism for the potentials of crowd-funded science, for sure, just from my own experience, being a crowd-funded scholar, basically.
And I see it in a couple of ways as well. One is an informed populace can help set some of the policies that Mahmud is speaking to. When you have people that understand their community needs, understand it from a science perspective, they can better advocate for themselves, whether it's for funding or policy changes, or, hey, maybe we ought not have the plane route fly over this particular school and dump fuel. So those are the things that I think an informed populace can do. Another thing is an example I can give you of science being directly involved in the community. There was a food bank that relies on a community garden that relies on science people to make sure that the soil is safe for growing a food. You know, it's a community need that is met by a group of volunteers that is helped by scientists, and the community supports that effort because they want to make sure that the food that is grown for those that are experiencing homelessness or food insecurity is healthy and safe. So I think there are lots of ways in which we can engage our community at the very small level of food pantry to influencing policy by having informed young people. One of my colleagues here in the greater LA area worked with some kids and gave them air quality monitors to put on their backpacks. And they just walked around their community with backpacks. And it changed the policy and caused one of the polluters in their community to have to relocate. No one was going to put forth a study on it. So they had a bunch of kids just, do air quality by putting on their backpacks. So I can see that there are connections at the policy level of influencing state funding or grant funding, but also at the local level of providing something beneficial to those who are in need.
If I just may add to that, is that it's, I mean, this is really very encouraging, and this is just opens up the realm of possibility. But also we shouldn't, not stop asking our institutions to do more, right? So especially if you look at, recently we had the opportunity to work with colleagues at the National Academy on looking at the land grants. And if you look at the cooperative extension services, they have a long history of having that community relations, and somehow we directed all of the land grant into meeting our national priorities. But there is an opportunity actually shift their mission to the public service mission, and that will also actually empower to do peoples and communities to do things at scale. It's just a shifting of priority. It's balancing your portfolio, and I don't think it's wrong to say it's an either or. What we are saying, it's an and. We can do the basic fundamental science and address community needs. So it's a false choice that we have to choose between the two. It's just rebalancing our portfolio. I think that's what's needed.
Yeah, and I wasn't saying that we should choose. I think you're right. It's an and, not an or. I think we can look at influencing, funding and priorities, and at the same time connect with our fellow community members by engaging them in science. When I think about how far we've come technologically in my lifetime, I was about to say my age, just in my age group, my first computer programming class was using punch cards. When you look at that, you see that there's so much potential out there for changing the conversation at scale, and as well as locally within a family. If you think about the anti-smoking campaigns of the the 70s and the 80s. That made in the schools, that made a significant change in how we view smoking and lung cancer. It really made a difference because we started at the conversational level with kids. And even now, my granddaughter the other day told me that my soda wasn't healthy. And so, so I don't drink soda around my grandkids anymore. So just the conversations that she's having with the educators in her school is really fundamentally changing how I behave. And I think that's something that we can seize upon.
I think what you're talking about here, Darin, transitions really well into one of our questions from the audience that I want to pose to you all, which is about like scientific training. Because I think there's a lot in here where we're not necessarily always training the next generation to do the community work, or like we need to rebalance the portfolio within our educational offerings too as well. So the question from the audience member is, well, individual scientists, we may not have the ability to change doctoral training at scale. Do you have thoughts on how academic training could be revamped to train scientists to be grounded in the community?
Well, I think we build on like what the NSF had with broader impacts, which is still in existence, where part of your research task is to engage the community and to have whether it's educators or children or elderly people, it doesn't matter, but being able to explain or get input on your research from people who may or may not benefit from it, I think it's just a natural connection.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. Was your comment gonna build off Darin's? Because mine was a little separate. So if yours is like kind of dovetailing from his, I feel like you should go first.
Okay. Yeah. So I was looking at, at some point we wanted scientists and engineers to be entrepreneurs, right? So NSF has this program on iGuard, basically trains scientists. You get $50,000 more to go and study, go through the boot camp about how do you take a startup in, and the whole idea is get out of the building, go and talk to the people you're actually building. So we can do the same thing with the society. So an iGuard focused on social issues would do the same. So there's already a model that's in existence that can then says how do you actually, but the idea is still getting out of the lab and into whatever that you are, wherever you are thinking about affecting change. And the more opportunities that the universities and a part of our training can give us that, the better equipped the scientists and engineers would be out of the university. Sorry, Fatima, go ahead.
No, don't apologize at all, Mahmoud. That's a great answer. What I was gonna say was, I having worked in academia and kind of being a part of these initiatives that, like for example, try to teach scientists and engineers how to think more socially and systematically and stuff. That's like very important, and building up that infrastructure is very important. But having been booted out of the academy now, and kind of operating outside of it, I've been thinking more about how the question of, how do we educate scientists and engineers in this maybe more socially oriented way doesn't only have to take place within our institutions. I feel like the work of what I'm trying to do on YouTube is exactly that, right? I'm trying to speak to scientists and give them political and social context to think about their work and themselves. And I actually just learned such a cool historical example of this. Mary Curie was educated in something called the Flying University, which was an underground, citizen-run, like opposite to the state education system that was specifically operating like in turn of the century Poland to teach ideas and in ways that were banned by the state at the time. For example, teaching women physics, right? That wasn't happening in state institutions at Poland at the time, but because some people organized this outside of the institution education system, we have a world where, you know, Madame Curie existed and won Nobel Prizes in physics and chemistry. And I feel like that's such an interesting thing to think about, especially in this particular moment where so much of what, you know, the Trump administration has been doing, gutting of research and initiatives in academia, a lot of it is limiting who is going to be there, right? It's a lot of cutting of these initiatives that were working to expand participation in science, and grow who's involved there. And I love this example because it's such a powerful example of how working outside the institutions and seeking and building education and opportunities for it outside just what our, you know, prescribed systems are, has so much potential. Um, yeah. I just learned about that a week ago. I'm so excited to share it.
That's
And,
so
and,
interesting. I
and I,
think we have some folks in the chat asking you to add the source so they could read up on it if you have a chance.
There is a Wikipedia. I haven't read more about it than the Wikipedia article, but it's Flying University. If
and
you Google that, you'll find the Wikipedia article. I actually learned about it from a YouTuber, did a big YouTube video recently on like some science wars stuff and mentioned it. But it's a really cool. It was Sean. If any, for the YouTube people in the audience, it's Sean's video on the war on science that came out last week. Anyway.
and I think another way in which we can make sure that there is adequate representation is by empowering families. When my daughter was younger, she had asked a question, and I had her about African Americans in our culture, and I had her watch the Eyes on the Prize video series, which talked about the civil rights movement, and I didn't realize that there was so much she didn't know, because a lot of our history and culture, it just isn't shared. And I don't necessarily think it's some nefarious thing. It's just my granddaughter is in kindergarten and her has a packet of homework every week, so there's not a whole lot of time to explore contributions like Lewis Latimer as an engineer. So I think we can empower families through our outreach efforts to look at different people who have made contributions in science, indigenous cultures as well. We can do what we did before there was a television, a radio, and an internet. We actually talked, and we spent time around the dinner table or time in our communities. I think because technology has made the world so much easier and faster that sometimes we lose track of the things that really unite us in our communities. And that's just interaction and conversation and talking to some of the older people in your family. You talk to your grandparents or you talk to your aunts and uncles, and they can share some fascinating stories about things they did and discovered. My family and the southern roots of my family, they had to figure out how to do laundry without detergent. And so these were chemists that were figuring out ways to preserve the colors in their clothes without having them say dirty or stinky. These were fascinating conversations. When you look at soul food, which is now a delicacy, it wasn't a delicacy for slaves, it was what was left over. And so I think tying in our culture and our communities to scientific learning that is already in existence is a way to show representation. It doesn't necessarily have to be on a website. I learned a lot about my culture and history and science from people in my community who knew things that I didn't know. And it was long before there was an internet too.
Mhm. I think that there's such an importance of like getting out and speaking to people and sharing messages and like that community involvement. And I have one last question I want to quickly post you all, and I hope that we can wrap it on somewhat of a positive note because it's a little bit speaking to the anxieties I think that people are feeling like there are like adversarial forces against scientists, this sort of culture war that's going on between different parts of our society. So how do you think about like engaging the public, knowing that, we're in this really difficult time where we want to engage honestly and openly, but, not put ourselves in risk in however that kind of looks for the individual person.
Man, you're asking those stumper questions there, Al.
I'll blame that on the audience member, but thank you for your question.
Can
It's
you
hard, yeah.
can you state that one more
Yeah,
time so
I
I
guess
can like absorb
so.
it?
The way it was phrased by the audience member is how can we protect ourselves and engage honestly and authentically with the public at the same time?
I feel like I have to ask, protect ourselves from what? I'm curious what the implication of what
Yeah,
that
I'm
is.
not quite sure exactly what they meant. I think like there's this feeling that science is under attack and like, you know, it could be about retaliation. I know that that's something that people are experiencing in the academy and things like that.
Well,
Could
I can only
yeah.
speak to just my experience of just being on, on planet Earth is for most of the history of my family and my generations, speaking out was not something that you could do. We could not, if someone was walking down the street, you had to get off the sidewalk. You couldn't look certain people in the eye. You couldn't speak certain things. But the knowledge still was able to be shared. And so I think there's just being wise and really looking to see where there are opportunities to engage in science curiosity and taking advantage of those opportunities when they're available, but also being wise because if you're shut out of the system, then your contributions are lost as well. So you have to be a little bit more strategic. There are things that I would love to say that I cannot say in an open forum, but I can still get the information out through relationships that I have. And again, it's not through social media or internet. It's us interacting one-on-one, having conversation, building community. No matter what the forces have been throughout history, we as a species have survived because of community. And this is just one more time that we have to come together for the betterment of all of us. And I think that's where we have to stand on our historic perspective of coming together in difficult times to further our species. And I have absolute confidence that that's something that we can do. And just by being here with all of you shows that that is something that people are looking for, an opportunity just to connect and share. And we'll be able to reach each other now that we have fancy schmancy electrons zipping through the atmosphere. In the olden days, if you were in Europe and somebody was in America, you had to wait for a ship to come and then a horse to bring. And but still, think about all the advances that happened, throughout history before we had all these fancy schmancy gadgets that interconnected us. All of that is still there. We're still human beings and we still have the capacity for love and care and connecting. And there are always going to be forces against what you want to do. You just have to be wise, strategic, and a little bit clever. But that's what we do. We're science and engineers. We're clever.
I see Heidi's clarification in the chat of the question, and I kind of understand more what they're getting at now. And I completely feel this. Like in the last months, as somebody who makes highly political content about science on the internet in this current climate, I have felt a lot of paranoia about what I should and shouldn't say and what is conducive for my safety and what is conducive for my career and my ability to keep doing this. And I honestly don't have a great, like, clear prescriptive answer of like, this is how much risk you should take and this is how much you should like shield yourself in and maybe not push the envelope. But I think something that I have been trying to keep at the forefront of my mind that I might share towards this question is that the fear is a lot of the point, right? The current administration is acting in such a way that is very strategically trying to chill conversation, trying to discourage conversation, trying to make us all think that we're better off if we don't, push the envelope at all. And so while I do think it is very important to consider your own safety and to keep revisiting that as a condition or precondition for any kind of activism or advocacy you're going to do, I do kind of find myself continuously trying to challenge the desire to pull back with, are you just playing into what they want, right? Are you just, kind of bowing at the first bit of I don't know what the word is, pushback. And, you know, it's a very personal line to walk. But I do want to keep reminding myself that the fear is the point in a lot of contexts, and just to remember that and let that kind of inform how I move forward. Big stuff.
Yeah, I would pick up on Darin's point about conversation. And what we see, you know, my line of work is holding public conversations, small scale, large scale, all over the country. And when we see, and most of these are about science and technology topics, and people actually bring tremendous amount of nuances and ideas into this conversation. And what they say then it makes you actually think, and they bring up new ideas that experts sometimes don't think. So we see actually two America, the America that shows up in these polls and so forth, but there's also an America that shows up when we're holding this conversation. So let's look at where those conversations are happening. For us, it's happening at the libraries. It's happening at the museums. So, and when you look at, you know, all the survey of institutions, you actually see libraries and museums ranking way higher than you know, government or private sector or and other places. So I would say that to those who are kind of now feeling the pressure, maybe start with a trusted place first, and then reach out to the people who are not really, they don't hate science, they actually love science, they can bring the curiosity to actually make science even better and answer the question they care about. But those spaces, the more we can create those spaces away from, you know, what's happening in the social media and our politics, is the more we will empower the people who are trying to now feeling the pressure. So thank you.
Oh gosh, thank you everyone for this amazing conversation. We are unfortunately out of time, and I would love to keep this going forever, but I think we have to wrap it up here. Thank you all of our panelists for being here. You are all fantastic. Thank you to the audience for being here and being so lively and in the chat and sharing so many insights. Haven't fully been able to read it, but I'm excited to look at it again. If you guys want to keep the conversation going on ESAL community, we welcome you to do that. Fatima and Darin are on there if you wanted to say hello to them. That's an easy way to reach out. And we will have the recording for this webinar up on our YouTube within the week. So please feel free to share it with anyone you think is interested in this conversation. And thank you so much for being here and spending this time with us.
And Al, is it possible for you to grab some of the questions that didn't get answered in the chat and the Q&A and post them in ESAL? You know, maybe create a page for like questions from the webinar.
Yeah,
and
great
so,
idea, Darin.
So
Taylor has been compiling those in the background, so we have.
So if you didn't get your questions answered, join the community, because it might get answered there, and it won't just be answered by the panelists; it'll be answered by your friends and colleagues who are also on the call. You know, as a plug for the community, I think it's just a great place for us to keep the conversation going. Yes,
thank you for that, Darin. Doing my job better than I am. I appreciate you. All right, thanks everyone. We're gonna wrap here. I'll stay on for a little bit for folks with questions about ESAL community or ESAL in general. But thank you again for being here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. And Fatima and Mahmud, thank you for being there. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Al and Taylor, for bringing us together.
Definitely. Great company.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.